about reproductive effort, that it's everything associated with reproduction. That's what we're talking about. The more energy you spend with reproduction, the less you have for other activities, such as playing with your Nintendo Switch, I don't know, whatever they happen to be doing. No, the more time you spend in reproduction, the less time you have to spend on yourself, your own care and maintenance. So late summer, the birds, the mama bird and daddy bird, they look horrible. They're also about to go into a molt, but they're wore out. They look smaller than their babies because their babies are their priority. You spend less time on territorial defense. So I know the most about birds, that's why we're staying there for a minute. But a paired male spends less time singing and patrolling than a male that doesn't have a mate yet, partly because he doesn't have time. He's now engaged in other activities. And so there's a lot that goes on. And so how much energy you invest in reproduction is going to determine factors such as how much do your young weigh when they're born. I could skip to mammals there for a second, right? You look at the marsupials versus the eutherian mammals. The marsupials have babies that are born not even fully developed yet. And then eutherians spend a little bit more energy in their body so that when they're born, they're more developed. Feeding of the young and parental care. Some of that happens in some species of animals. Lots of species of animals that doesn't happen. Okay, so do you want to spend money? Well, if you're a human, do you want to spend effort on that or not? And the other things that go along with it. We're going to start with investment in parental care. And so caring for young is a major reproductive expenditure. Ask your parents about it. I don't know what the estimate is right now, but they always estimate things like how much it'll cost to have a child, raise a child from when they're born to when they're 18, or something like that. And it's always a huge amount of money, which is true for sure, but you don't spend it at once, right? They're kind of implying that you're going to go broke, but most people have babies and not everybody goes broke. Right? Anywho, there are kind of two options when it comes to parental care. One is to have precocial young. That's young that are able to get up and move around shortly after being born or hatched, depending on what we're talking about. And so, although they are born well developed and can move around compared to the other group that we're going to talk about, they still have to do a lot of growing and maturing outside the nest. And so you have to account for that essentially. And so you have less parental care. You need parental care to get them to where they need to be. All right, let me just go straight to the killdeer because that's what I'm thinking about the whole time. And so the first picture here is the most adorable baby in North America. That's the killdeer babies. They're pretty adorable. And so as soon as the egg hatches, they can run around. But they're pretty dumb. They don't know how to hide. They don't know how to gather food. And so even though they can get up and move with their parents quickly, they still need a lot of parental care. That's what I'm getting at. Their parents have to wrangle them up. So in ornithology in the spring, we were fortunate enough to see baby killdeer. And at least in one of the labs, maybe more, we got to watch the babies run over to the parent and snuggle in underneath the wings so the parent could protect them. So you look like you have a killdeer with like 8 pairs of legs, which is kind of fun. And so these are going to mature quickly until they hatch, and then you've got to. They need less parental care in that they can thermoregulate on their own, they can run on their own, they can do all of that, but they're not independent. Like I feel like it's implying it's independent. I guess that's what I'm hung up on. It's not like they pop out and they're a fully formed adult that runs around. To give you an example of a mammal, a gray seal can give birth in 45 seconds. And then the baby seal is already able to swim next to the mama after just a couple of minutes. But that doesn't make them fully independent. It just makes them mobile and able to move around as compared to cats and dogs, for example, where their eyes aren't open yet and their ears are still immature. For birds, being precocial is really common in the ground birds like killdeer, but these over here are shorebirds. Both the last two pictures are shorebirds. Ducks is another classic example. My favorite, the wood ducks that jump out of the tree and bounce and then they run off with their parents. But those wood ducks, while they can move through the woods and their parents can get them to water, they're still not independent. All right, our second option is to be altricial. And this is where they are born helpless, and so that's what it's referring to as they need complete parental care, right? And so in this case, they're completely dependent upon care from their parents. Whereas in the case of the precocial babies, they need their parents to learn how to feed and move around and hide and stuff. But if a parent did get killed, they at least have a shot, right? In this case, if these birds over there, if their parents got killed at this point, they're goners. Right? They still need to be. They can't thermoregulate on their own. They can't see. They can't gather food. You know, they can't do anything like that. There was no awe for the puppies.
Oh, cute.
I know, right? You're supposed to be like, oh. But there are many mammals. The puppies are an example. Kittens also an example, where they're born with their eyes closed. And then you got the naked babies. I got a link down here. I'm thinking it might be the laughing birds. Let's see. Let's see if it comes up behind me. Yeah, okay, see, it is the laughing birds. Oh yeah, it's my favorite video. Oh, I'm the one who's muted. Oh yeah, I gave an exam. Why am I muted? There it is. Okay. Okay. Let's go over. Coming back. Y'all can't see him anyway, right?
Nope.
No.
Aww. Okay, I'll make it where you can see him. I didn't make it where you can see him. Just made it as full. Hey. Some of y'all have seen this if you've had ornithology. It's my favorite video. And it shows begging birds that are altricial. There we go. I know how to turn it down. Alright, that's one of my favorite birds. Why did I put it up twice? That one, I know, right? That's my favorite video. It makes me feel good. The other one that makes me feel good that I don't have an appropriate reason to ever show in class is Melissa McCarthy lip syncing to Colors of the Wind on Jimmy Fallon. If you've never seen that, you've got to see that. It's really good. All right, that's my other one that makes me cheerful. All right, so you can be altricial or precocial. So how much developed the baby is at its birth, and that's going to depend on how much parental care you have to provide. The next one, we're going to talk about fish. These are words we don't use in ornithology much, but you probably had them if you had ichthyology. Another consideration of how much energy you wish to invest in a single reproductive effort. That is certainly applicable for birds. So for example, some of you may have done the eagle tours, for example, and you learn that eagles aren't sexually mature until they're about 5 years old. And so they're making a decision that they're going to wait till later in life, first of all. And then they typically are only going to have, well, they may lay 2 eggs, but they typically only have 1 or 2 babies a year. Although this summer 3 fledged from the nest across from the pit at Kiwanis Park. But that's unusual, usually only 1 or 2. For fish, it gets even more dramatic. So let's start with Simulparis. And so Simulparis is where you invest all your energy into growth and development and energy storage, and you make one massive reproductive effort and die. So the picture on the bottom there is salmon. Salmon being a classic example, but there are invertebrates, including insects and Also many plant species that are also simiparous. In the case of the salmon, they swim out into the ocean and the salt water changes their bodies and they live out in the salt water growing, obtaining mass, and then they come back to the stream where they were born, all the way to the pool where they were born, and they have one reproductive effort. But the time they hit the freshwater, they're dying. And so their whole movement up the stream into the freshwater, they're essentially barely making it, and then they get rid of their gametes and then they're done. There's lots of insects, there's lots of jokes about insects too, where you have the big bloom in the spring, lots of insects, lots of that individual species, and they'll have sex and die. That's pretty much it. People know that about insects. That's also simiparous. In order for the strategy to work, you have to increase your fitness enough in your one reproductive effort to make up for the fact that you're not going to reproduce for many years to come. Okay? And a lot of times what you have in these species is they're going with a strategy where they're flooding the environment, right? And so with the insects, that's what they're doing, especially the aquatic insects. They're flooding the environment, and during that time, the fish go crazy for them. You know, anything that's eating those insects is happy. All the little flycatchers are eating them. But there's so many, they can't possibly eat them all, right? Whereas if you just had a few babies, the fish and the birds were like, done. And then you have a few more babies. And so your odds of getting a few through to adulthood are going to be greater if you flood the environment. So that's kind of the strategy they're going with. I noticed that I put a bald eagle on the next slide. Since I've already mentioned them, that's good, I guess. But bald eagles are iteroparous, meaning that they have fewer young at a time, but they have repeated reproduction through their lifetimes. So most vertebrates fall into this category, though not all, as we saw, some fish aren't. Your perennial plants that are living for more than a year, they fall into this category as well. Humans would fall into this category, tend to have a few babies at a time. The questions that iteroparous individuals have to ask is whether you want to start reproducing early in life or later in life. And a lot of that's going to be reflected upon how risky your life is. So what are your odds of living to be 5? And so for eagles, what do you think their odds of living to 5 is? It's pretty good, right? We don't have to have a number. We know it's pretty good. Otherwise, they would have evolved to start reproducing earlier than at the age of 5 years old. Northern cardinals are going to breed their very first breeding season after they hatch. So what are your odds as a cardinal? Not as good. Not terrible. If they make it to their first breeding season, they can live 6-7 years, but most of them don't make it to their first breeding season. And then in humans, we wait physiologically until 13 to 16, somewhere around in there. Socially, in the United States anyway, longer, typically. All right, any questions about those two? You're not quiet. You don't have to have babies. I said socially, you don't have to have babies. Until you're ready. Okay. How many young you are able to support can reflect the amount of food available to you. That's something about real food in the last few years has apparently just been really good because, like I said, the eagles had 3 babies. That's unusual. And when Skylar and I were doing our osprey research, the osprey are typically the same. They're going to lay apparently at least 3 eggs, and most of the time that means they're going to have fledge 1 young. But we had more than 1 nest. We had a few nests in which they were able to fledge 3 babies. So if the food is abundant, you can do well. It's going to impact your success. But parents can't predict whether or not the food is going to be readily available. It might be a drought year, maybe it's a wet year, you just never know. And so they need the ability to reduce the number of young that they have to care for. Now, this is not a conscious decision that the parents are making. They're not going, I like Billy better than Susie, or I like Susie better than Billy. That's not really how this works. Although this morning, for whatever reason, I was watching a comedian and he was talking about how they had 4 children. It wasn't the one family, it was 2 families. They had 4 children and 4 adults, I think, and they wanted to get the kids Happy Meals, but they only had enough money for 3 kids. And so one kid didn't get a Happy Meal, right? That's actually what this is talking about, right? I think they still fed the kid. He looked healthy. He was the one that didn't get it. But he didn't get a Happy Meal that night with the rest of the kids. Anyway, and so it's not a conscious decision. This is not something the parents are doing on purpose, but it's handled in a couple of ways. One of the ways is to have asynchronous hatching. And so in asynchronous hatching, what happens is the young that you have are different ages. And so with birds, let's say they laid 5 eggs. In some species, they all hatch at the same time, which is synchronous hatching, and so that wouldn't really apply to them. With asynchronous hatching, the first egg that's laid is the first egg that hatches. The last egg that is laid is the last egg that hatches. And so you have one nestling that's 5 days older than the last hatchling that's hatched. And in birds, development during a 5-day period is huge. In the songbirds, they will fledge in sometimes 11 to 12 days. Right? So 5 days is a large amount of development once a bird is hatched. And so then what you have is an older sibling that is able to lift its head and beg higher than all of the younger siblings, the smaller siblings. And so when the parents come to the nest, they're going to feed the head that's up the highest with the widest gape, whose mouth is open the widest. And so if they have a lot of food, that's fine. They'll feed the biggest one, the most developed one. It'll get tired and sleepy, and it'll fall asleep, and then the other babies can get food. Okay? If there's not enough food to go around, and that big one never gets enough food, or then it's never going to quit begging, and those smaller ones never have a chance to really compete with it. And so they'll die, essentially. Does that make sense? I had a newer picture there. I mean, I can tell some are more feathered than that one on top, but it's not a great picture. And I've taken out the video. There was a video I used to show on this slide, but it was very slow building. So it took a while to get through the video. And what it was osprey again. And they are asynchronous hatching. And their eggs are not 1 day apart like they are in songbirds, they're further apart. And so you have one larger nestling and one smaller nestling in the nest. And they had a nest cam on it, and so that's why it's kind of slow building, because they're showing you the sequence over a long period of time. And what essentially happened was the parents were coming in and feeding the bigger one, but they weren't catching enough fish for the younger one. And you slowly see the younger one until it's very lethargic, and it's just kind of laying against the nest, and eventually it dies. And in that particular case, it's not really siblicide because the other one didn't kill it. Siblicide's going to be on the next slide. They just kind of left the body there. And so every once in a while, his sibling might kind of pick at him a little bit after he was dead, but otherwise it just stayed there. Then I think one day, several weeks later, the mama eventually carried the body away. And so it's kind of weird watching it, because she doesn't make any type of reaction to the baby starving to death and the baby dying and then the baby's body being in the nest. But that's just what happens out in the wild, I guess. All right. Again, it's not a conscious decision made by the parents, but you can have siblicide. We're going to watch, I think this is the highly dramatic video, if I remember correctly. Like, very dramatic siblicide video, because I think I've settled on that as being my favorite one. But it's got dramatic music and all that kind of stuff. But basically what happens in siblicide is not what I was just describing in the osprey. Instead of the sibling also being kind of oblivious to its dying sibling beside it, it is more active. It actually kills the sibling, right? Siblicide. Siblicide is also sometimes called canism, which I think they're going to talk about in the video. Siblicide happens in a lot of species, including raptors, egrets, herons, boobies. The video will be the boobies, primarily because boobies are ground nesting birds, and in places like the Galapagos, they're not afraid of humans, and so people can just walk right up to them and they'll see them. They'll see the siblings pushing their brother or sister. So with the boobies, essentially what happens is they live in a really hot environment, and so the babies need shade in order to survive. And so the mother will stand over the babies, and one of them will push the other one out into the sun, and the mom won't react to that, essentially. The pelicans I always find kind of interesting, because in pelicans, if you see a live pelican, they have most likely killed at least one of their siblings. They lay 3 eggs, and they can generally only raise 1, sometimes 2, and so they have killed at least one of their siblings. So every pelican you see is a murderer, which is kind of interesting. So anyway, that's what happens. Just watch the highly dramatic video. This one's not silly like the last one. I just enjoy the silly. Whatever they're selling, don't buy it.
Something like what? Made it easy to build a $6.99 meal deal with any 6-inch sub.
Okay, you can go see Moana too if you want to.
Raising young takes energy and resources. And many birds have only enough to raise 1 chick at a time. This Nazca booby, just days older than his brother, wants to make sure that chick is him. He's plotting to become an only child.
Not really. It's all genetic.
It's a Cain and Abel power struggle, set before either was born. Their parents courted, with beak pointing and an exchange of gifts. That led to a pair of eggs. And Cain was their firstborn. 4 days later, his baby brother.
Those are very dramatic.
Cain has one goal in mind. To get his kid brother as far from the nest as possible. Where he is sure to die. It's a ruthless act of self-preservation. The helpless younger chick has only one hope. Mom. She does nothing. Her youngest faces certain death from dehydration or predator. She's not cruel. She's only got enough in her to raise 1 chick. The other was her insurance policy.
That might be a little dramatic. One chick
Cain
only.
kills Abel. And with him, the competition. Now Mom is all his. He killed his brother so he could live.
That's a good dramatic video. I'm also really glad that humans don't feed their babies by sticking their head down their parents' throat.
How gross.
Subtly. This is Kate.
Okay. So even in that one,